On the way home last night, listening to a secular station, a news station, they had a story about George Washington University. At a stoplight, I mentioned to my family, we have this family thing where we can talk to each other. I says, man, when I get home, I've got to look this up. But George Washington University is doing a seminar on Christian privilege. Not white privilege. Christian privilege. So I get home, I put Christian privilege in. It's a thing. There's all sorts of stuff. Wikipedia entries and, well, is there anything that doesn't have a Wikipedia entry? Christian privilege. And so I guess now we're going to be told we need to give up our Christian privilege. And I just go, is that what is Christian privilege? What happens to Vice President Pence whenever he says anything positive about the Bible or Jesus, and the entire culture and all the media elites become unglued and use every kind of four-letter word under the planet to rip and snort at him? Is that what Christian privilege is? I'm a little confused as to what that is. Is it if you're discovered having donated to Prop 8 in California, how you're drummed out of Silicon Valley? Is that the Christian privilege? Up in Canada, where if you have a law school based upon Christian privilege, you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to. No such thing as being able to have a Christian attorney before the law. Is that Christian privilege? I'm just trying to figure it out. Where's the Christian privilege in North Korea, I wonder, or China right now? I'm just a little confused about that. But yeah, George Washington needs to warn us about Christian privilege, even though at George Washington University, if you are actually an Orthodox Christian, their chances of getting tenure or having any type of meaningful position are nil. They're still going to have something about Christian privilege. Doesn't that tell you this privilege thing might just be a little bit on the vacuous side? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, George Washington University. Wow. So I was thinking about not only that, but, I listened to the briefing, and you can't listen to the briefing anymore without multiple times per week hearing about the utter collapse of meaningful, moral, and ethical foundations within Western culture. And you hear judges, there was just today, there was a judge who died who was he was the most overturned federal judge. And he was proud of it. Because as he said once, they can't catch them all. So here's a guy, wide open. I will not do what I said I would do as a judge and follow the Constitution. I'm purposely trying to change things, and they can't stop me. The liberal lion, they called him. And he died. While still on the bench. I mean, these liberals will go until they drop because this is their whole meaning in life. That's why they're there. And so you listen to this stuff fairly regularly, and you listen to all this discussion of privilege. That guy, remember a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that Southern Baptist pastor in probably California. It's always a safe guess. Yes. Yeah, I think it was Danny Cortez, I think it was. Yeah. I think it was California. Anyway, who embraced a pro-LGBTQ perspective because his son came out as gay. He resigned as pastor because he said that he had come to realize pastoral privilege. That a pastor has privilege in the church. And so he doesn't want to have any privilege. But they don't have anybody to take his place. I mean, I think it's good that he resigned for obviously other reasons. But this is the thinking. If you will think this through, if you will think through what's being said, well, you have this privilege and you have that privilege, and you know, if you're in the majority in one country, you know, you might go to another country and you're no longer in the majority, you're in the minority, and so what is behind the thinking in the totalitarian left in our country? See, and this is why for decades now, public education hasn't taught you how to think, but what to think. Because if you were taught how to think, you would recognize the need to examine the presuppositions behind the positions being forced upon you. Today's American thinks emotionally rather than logically, and therefore entirely absurd presuppositions can be accepted by a large portion of the population because they don't recognize that they're there. The emotional content communicates the worldview presuppositions, but their filters are off for that. It's the emotional thing that they grab hold of. And so all this privilege stuff, when you think about it, what's being said is we all need to have not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. So if, now they can't make this work, but when you think about it, there should be a lot of objection on these folks' part to the fact that the guys that played for Villanova last night in the NCAA finals, some of them, well, most of them are really tall. You know, I didn't see anybody out there under about 6'1", 6'2". They're privileged. They should give up that privilege and let people that are 5'4" do the same things. Because, I mean, just think of the advantages that these men have. They just won a national championship. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of those guys. That one guy, Di Lorenzo or something like that, he led Villanova last night off the bench with 31 points. He's probably going to end up in the NBA. Man, you get in the NBA, you get a lot of money. There's a real advantage there. He's advantaged. He has privilege. And you're not supposed to have privilege because, you see, in the communist worldview, there is no God who raises up one man and abases another. There is no God who makes men to differ. There is no God who makes one man 5'2". You know, when I taught at this little Christian school one year, the basketball team, there was this one young man who was a tremendous basketball player. But at full height as an adult, he may have been 5'4". Great shooter. But, you know, when the other guy guarding you is 6'2", basketball is just not going to be your thing. And in the Christian worldview, you go, that's God's doing. You look to what he has gifted you to do. You look to the gifts he's given to you, and you're thankful for them, and you don't complain about everyone else, and you don't say to God, everybody should just be 6 feet. Just nobody below, nobody above. Everybody should just be 6 feet. You don't do that. You recognize God makes men to differ. And you do not find in Scripture this, you should be angry at those who have more than you. Now, if they get it unjustly, but see, these people are thinking that justice means we all have the same amount in our bank account at all times. That's not justice. That's not justice. And it's not a Christian worldview that gives rise to that kind of greed and envy, because that's what it is. It's greed and envy. So when you think through what all this privilege talk is about, what it boils down to is they want not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. And I hope you know what that means. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Now, he didn't make it up. He borrowed it from somebody else, but he made it famous. His name was Karl Marx. And that's why it is perfectly, absolutely appropriate to identify the foundations of, even when it's dressed in religious garb, this is neo-Marxism. This is communism. And it's alive and well in the West, and it's taking over because the educational system was set up to allow it to do so. There are so many communists in our universities right now, it's astounding. In their worldview. They're all around us. And those of us that don't want that are sitting around going, how'd they get there? It's pretty obvious how they got there. Now, in case you haven't noticed, communism and Christianity do not get along. Communism inevitably persecutes believing Christians. Ask anyone in China or North Korea today. The scary thing is, if you talk to even, middle-aged Americans today and say, do you know how many people died under communist regimes in the last century? I mean, you've watched jaywalking before. You've watched, anybody these days can go out and ask these questions. And, when you can show people pictures of Ronald Reagan, they don't know who he was. You don't expect them to know much more about this stuff. And of course, you got these people running around with the Che Guevara shirts on. Just mind-numbed robots. And just ask them, how many people do you think died under communist regimes in the 20th century? I really wonder what kind of answers you would get from the vast majority of the American populace. That there is no absolute number, because how are we supposed to know? But pretty safely, 80 to 100 million. Yeah, that's what I said. Million. Look at Stalin. Look at Mao. Look at Pol Pot. Look at the killing fields. I recently started writing. Yeah, recently started. I was going to say reading a book while writing, and then my tongue got in front of my eye teeth, couldn't see what I was saying. I recently started reading a book about the murder of 3.9 million Ukrainian peasants and 1.1 million Russian peasants. So right at 5 million people between December of 1930 and into 1932. So 18 months, starved to death by the communist Russian government, Soviet government. Starved to death. I won't even describe. Dying of starvation is ugly. And there was no need for it. It was done purposely to wipe out the Ukrainian nationalist movement. Millions. People will march on Washington and promote the adoption of a governmental system that was guilty in the last century of the murder of millions of people, as if they are the moral virtue warriors. Unbelievable. You know how they get away with it? People don't know. They've been deceived. They've been misled. They don't know. They're ignorant. There's no reason for the ignorance. I mean, the internet is still pretty good at finding stuff like that. But it is astounding. It is astounding. There is a reason why, as Christians, we should oppose communism. Communism, at its foundation, rejects biblical standards regarding the nature of man and God's right as creator to determine how his creatures live. When you think about the secular worldview that is the foundation of every application of communism that has ever been established, there is a warfare between that system and the Christian faith. And it's easy to see why. Christianity tells us that man is fundamentally evil, and that concentrating power in the hands of fundamentally evil men will result in bad things. And it always has. It always has. The idea of this utopia where we're all satisfied with our loaf of bread and our half a jug of milk each day, because that's what we all get, is absurd. No one's going to live that way. You always have the people in power getting more than everybody else, because the Bible tells us their heart is desperately sick and wicked. They will lie to others, they will deceive others, and they will fulfill their lusts. If you have a biblical anthropology, you can't believe this foolishness of the socialist communist worldview. It's absurd. You have to warn against it. And you do so primarily by preaching the gospel, because when you preach the gospel, you preach man is a sinner. God's law says this, man does this. Therefore, the best governmental system is one where you spread power out instead of concentrating it in one place. Look at what happened with the kings in Israel. God said, this is what's going to happen, and that's exactly what happened, right? Now, Christians can live under any governmental system, and they do. Believe it or not, there are Christians in North Korea. Oh, Lord, pray for them. But that doesn't mean that when we have the freedom to warn against the evils of men, that we should keep our mouths shut and not warn against the evils of men. And so you will have to forgive me. I'm so very, very sorry. But I will not keep my mouth shut when I see Marxism putting on Jesus t-shirts and parading around as evangelicalism. Those brothers and sisters may be very dedicated and they may be very sincere, but they're being used. There were lots of really sincere people that were part of the revolution that brought Marxism, Leninism to power in Russia. There were all sorts of things that the czars had done that were unjust and unfair. But the solution was significantly more murderous than the problem. And those young people, they were zealous. They may have had good motivations, but they were foolish. Foolish in being used in that way.